John Wick is dead. There's a tombstone. There's no body. And somehow, Keanu Reeves is confirmed to come back for Chapter 5. That's where we are right now with this franchise, and honestly, it's the most interesting place it's ever been, because the tension between those two things, the apparent death and the confirmed return, is exactly what makes the story of this series so fascinating to follow. Not just as an action franchise, but as a case study in how Hollywood stumbles into something it didn't plan for, panics at the idea of losing it, and then has to figure out what the hell to do next. And that is exactly what Lionsgate did. At CinemaCon in April, the studio officially confirmed that John Wick 5 is in active development, with Basil Iwanek and Erica Lee producing, Chad Stahelski directing, and Keanu Reeves returning to star. The same core team that built this thing is back. And what makes it even more interesting is the creative framing around it. Stahelski and Reeves didn't come back because Lionsgate wrote them a big check, and they shrugged. They came back because they say they found an idea they actually believe in. Lionsgate chairman Adam Fogelson confirmed at CinemaCon that the two of them landed on something that genuinely excites them, though no story details were shared publicly. Reeves himself, in a separate interview, said flat out that the character is dead, and yet he's signed on for Chapter 5. Both of those statements are true at the same time. That's not a contradiction, that's the whole point. The ending of Chapter 4 was never meant to be taken literally as a body on the ground. It was symbolic. It was John Wick the myth, the legend being laid to rest. The man who has been a weapon since the beginning of the franchise is finally done being one. The tombstone is for that version of him, not necessarily the person. This franchise has always operated in that kind of heightened, almost mythological space. And the decision to never show a body was deliberate. Stahelski is one of the most meticulous action directors working today, and that omission means something. What's been confirmed about Chapter 5 is actually more telling than you might expect. Stahelski has said clearly that the fifth film will not revisit the High Table storyline. That arc is genuinely over. The global syndicate, the markers, the ancient rules, the whole infrastructure, that's done. Whatever John comes back for, it's a completely new story, a fresh angle on the character. Think of it less like a continuation and more like a second act in a different play entirely. And the scripting side is serious. Mattson Tomlin, who co-wrote The Batman Part 2 and is adapting Keanu Reeves' own comic Berserker, is writing the script. From a story theory standpoint, this is the version of John Wick that the franchise has never been able to tell before. Every single movie in the series has been built around John being reactive. Someone takes something from him or forces an obligation on him and the machine starts. That structure works because John is always in service of something outside himself. The High Table is gone now. His wife is gone. He has no contracts, no debts, no people pulling on him. And that's actually terrifying if you think about it from a narrative perspective, because a man with nothing left to fight for is also a man with nothing left to lose. My read is that Chapter 5 will find someone in the margins of that world, not the High Table, but someone who sees the vacuum John left and wants to use him or exploit him or finish what the table couldn't. The emotional stakes would have to feel completely different from what came before, and that's exactly the challenge Stahelski and Reeves said they rose to. On the release timeline, be patient. According to a Lionsgate executive interview, Chapter 5 is planned to release after both the Kane spin-off and the animated prequel. Given the elaborate action choreography and international filming locations the franchise requires, the film is unlikely to be ready before the end of 2027 at the earliest. And realistically, with Stahelski currently directing the Highlander reboot and Reeves about to shoot a Tim Miller sci-fi film called Shiver, Chapter 5 is probably looking at 2028 or 2029. But the time gap actually makes sense because the franchise is not standing still. And while Chapter 5 is the anchor of all of it, there are 3 other projects that are going to keep this universe alive. And one of them is already in front of cameras right now. Donnie Yen confirmed that filming has officially begun on the Kane spin-off, posting a photo of the production slate on day 1. Yen is both directing and starring, and the story picks up directly after Chapter 4, following Kane after he's been freed from his obligations to the High Table. Rina Sawayama is back as Akira, and Stranger Things actor Dacre Montgomery has just joined the cast in an undisclosed role, making him the first new franchise character added to the project. The film has been described as a modern-day classic Hong Kong-style kung fu movie, modeled closely after the kind of action cinema that made Donnie Yen a legend. Think the Ip Man series, grounded, emotionally loaded, built around precise martial arts rather than the operatic gun-fu of the main John Wick films. That's a meaningful creative distinction. The franchise has always been maximalist. Neon architecture, layered mythology, relentless kinetic energy. Yen's sensibility as both a performer and now a director leans towards something more disciplined. If the film earns that tonal difference rather than just defaulting to John Wick's visual language, huge. It could carve out its own identity in a way Ballerina didn't quite manage. The data from Ballerina is basically a flashing sign that says the franchise's gravitational center is Keanu Reeves. Everything else is in orbit around him. Spin-offs can work, but they need a hook strong enough to justify their existence on their own terms, not just as extensions of the mythology. Donnie Yen as director of his own spin-off is exactly the kind of thing that could change that equation. It signals genuine creative investment rather than franchise product. Now let's talk about the project that I think is being slept on the most in all of this, which is the animated prequel. Lionsgate announced at CinemaCon that Shannon Tindall is directing the film with a screenplay by Vanessa Taylor. Tindall directed Netflix's Ultraman Rising and worked as an animator on Kubo and the Two Strings and Coraline. Taylor is an Oscar nominee who wrote the screenplay for The Shape of Water. That's an incredibly specific pairing of talents. One director deeply rooted in action animation with genuine visual range. One writer with real emotional craft. The film will follow John completing the impossible task, killing all of his rivals in a single night, in order to earn the right to leave the high table and be with Helen. It's confirmed to be rated R, targeted at adult audiences. This is the story the franchise has been teasing since the very first film. Every single movie builds on the foundation of what John gave up and why he gave it up, and the impossible task is the key to all of that. It's the thing that made him the Baba Yaga. It's the price he paid for Helen, and we've never seen it. Keanu Reeves is expected to voice the character, which closes the loop on any concern about tonal disconnect from the live-action canon. Here's what I think makes this the most interesting project in the entire pipeline though. Animation removes the ceiling. In the live-action films, the franchise does incredible things within the constraints of real locations and real stunt performers. But there are limits. Animation lets the visual language go somewhere completely different. The fights can be more expressionistic, the world can push further into the mythological territory that the franchise always flirts with but never fully commits to in live action. If Tindall leans into that freedom rather than just trying to replicate what the films look like, the prequel could end up being the emotional cornerstone of the entire franchise. The animated format finally gives the storytellers room to actually develop Helen. Across 4 films, she's the engine of everything John does, and she's barely on screen. She exists mostly as grief, as motivation, as memory. An animated film that takes its time with the early relationship, with who John was before he became the myth, with what he was actually fighting for when he completed that task, that could hit in a way none of the live-action entries have been able to, simply because they were always in the middle of the legend rather than before it. Then there's Under the High Table, the series. Robert Levine is writing and showrunning, with Chad Stahelski directing the pilot and serving as executive producer alongside Reeves. The show picks up directly after Chapter 4 and centers on entirely new characters navigating the power vacuum left behind after John dismantled the High Table's structure. No network is confirmed yet, though there's been speculation that the Lionsgate Prime video streaming deal could be the mechanism that gets it moving. After the Continental underperformed on Peacock, keeping Stahelski directly involved rather than handing it off to a B team was the right call. The instinct to draw on Bond-style international intrigue is smart. That layer has always been implied by the franchise's world building but never fully explored. And then on top of all that, there's the video game. Saber Interactive announced a John Wick title featuring an original story with Keanu Reeves reprising his role, and it's reportedly set before the events of the first film, making it yet another entry in that pre-Chapter 1 timeline alongside the animated prequel. So what does this all add up to? At this exact moment, the franchise is operating across film, animation, television, and games simultaneously, with one movie in active production right now, another that's one of the most anticipated action films of the decade, and an animated theatrical event that could redefine what the property means to audiences. That's a real universe, not just a sequel machine. The honest question underneath all of it is whether any of this works without John Wick at the center. Ballerina gave us the data, and the answer was basically, not yet. The franchise has a gravitational pull that comes from one specific person wearing that suit, and until a spin-off delivers something that genuinely earns its own audience, every peripheral project is going to be judged against the baseline of whether Keanu showed up. That's why Chapter 5 carries so much weight, not just as a box office event, though it will obviously be one, but as the anchor that either validates or undermines everything else being built around it. If it delivers something genuinely surprising, if it gives us a version of John Wick we haven't seen in 4 films, if it earns the tombstone and then earns the resurrection, it re-energizes everything else in the pipeline. Every spin-off gets better when the flagship is firing, and if it feels like a cash grab, the whole thing starts to wobble. Based on everything we know, the creative team that came back by choice, the writer who doesn't phone things in, the director who spent 3 years meticulously meticulousing every frame of Chapter 4 into something legitimately great, the intent is real. Stahelski said so himself. He described sitting down with Reeves and finding an idea they believe in the same way they once stood at the top of Sacré-Cœur at sunset, looked down those steps, and knew immediately that somebody was going down them. That instinct, that creative excitement, is what made Chapter 4 into one of the best action films of the past decade.